Welcome to Intersecting Voices, a podcast where diverse stories collide to inspire change and amplify voices. Welcome to another episode of Intersecting Voices. Today I'm joined by Katy Higgins Lee, a therapist based in California who specializes in working with neurodivergent adults and couples, especially those who are gifted, autistic, or ADHD. She holds a master's in counseling psychology with a focus on somatics, and she's also neurodivergent herself. Katy is perhaps best known for creating the well-known Venn diagram, showing the overlap between autism, ADHD, and giftedness. It's a visual that's helped countless people understand their own experiences more deeply, and that's me included. In today's conversation, we'll explore not only her professional insights, but also our shared lived experiences as neurodivergent women, and why promoting understanding of neurodivergence matters deeply to us. We'll unpack what giftedness truly means, how it shows up in children and adults, and why it's often so misunderstood. We'll also touch on the blurred lines between neurodivergent traits and mental health symptoms, the hidden ways of neurodivergence can present in women, and the heightened risks as neurodivergent people face when systems don't recognize or support us. And finally, we're going to discuss how to translate neurodivergent traits into strengths and needs into the workplace, and how we can create environments that allow every kind of mind to thrive. Hi, Katy. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to have you here. As I was mentioning before when we started talking, your name came across a while ago when I was assessed for ADHD and giftedness and autism as well. So understanding what is what and how they actually overlap was really important for me to get to know, who I was. I was diagnosed at 38 or 39 even, so it's quite late. So making sense, your diagram really helped me. So anyway, enough about me. And I guess I wanted to ask you about your experience. I know that you're quite well known in the neurodivergent community, and I wonder, what's inspired you to specialize in this field?
Well, actually, kind of similar to what you just shared about yourself. It was my own process of figuring out my own neurodivergence and my children also. And I had been a therapist actually for many years, like about 10 years already, when because of some things I was seeing in one of my children, I started to sort of revisit giftedness, because I had been identified as gifted when I was a child and then sort of forgotten about it, and then hadn't been identified as anything else other than gifted. And then when I was seeing some things in my child, I started looking back into giftedness again. And that led to me deciding to do a training in working with gifted clients. And then within that training, that was where someone suggested to me that I could be autistic. And I resisted the idea for quite a while, mainly because the information I'd learned about autism was honestly not necessarily incorrect, but just really missing a lot of information. And so it took me a while, but then I did start kind of diving into researching autism and started getting really interested in it. And then was starting to think that I probably was autistic. And then I decided to actually get assessed because I was still not completely sure. And then I did the assessment and they said, you're definitely autistic and we think you have ADHD also. And so then I ended up getting assessed separately for ADHD, and it turns out that was correct. So all of that led to me getting really interested in neurodiversity. And of course, neurodiversity is more than just autism, ADHD, even though that's what most people know. That's what people associate with it, but it actually includes a lot of other things as well. And what I found as I started learning about the neurodiversity paradigm, I realized that it really fit with how I had been framing a lot of other a lot of other clients that I worked with that weren't necessarily autistic or ADHDers, I started to realize that that framing fit for other clients that were diagnosed with other mental health conditions. And so that was kind of how it all started, was through my own process. And so then I started shifting my practice and started doing all kinds of trainings and reading books. And then I started to offer my own trainings as well. For therapists, like continuing education trainings as well. And similar to you, my process was quite late as well. I was 41 when I was officially diagnosed, but this whole process started for me when I was about 40, when I started looking into everything. And so it's been now like about 5.5, 6, actually about 6 years since everything shifted for me, basically.
Your story really resonates, because for me it was as well. It was my child that I started looking into. Something didn't quite fit, and the thing with especially girls is that she didn't show it in other places. She only showed it with me and our immediate family. So no one really believed me or believed us. But it was like, no, something is quite off here. Not that it's wrong, but it's different. And I don't have the tools to navigate this because I don't know what it is. So I remember like my mom and I having this conversation about, could it be ADHD? Because she would kind of energize herself to a level that she couldn't go down on her own. So I thought, could that be it? And this is what you said about my limited understanding of neurodivergence at the time. ADHD is hyperactiveness, right? That's what I knew about it. I've never
Right.
heard the term giftedness before. And autism to me was also very limited to what you've expressed there as well. I'm not sure if it's wrong beliefs, but it's just very narrow experiences of autism that as well has a very negative connotations as well. I think this still carries a stigma. So to me, it was maybe ADHD. And then my mom brought giftedness. It's like, what is that? Never heard about that. And I think, when I bring it up now to other people, because I was also, when I did the assessment, I was told for sure ADHD and giftedness. And when I tell people I'm gifted, they will tell me, congratulations. Obviously, they don't understand what it is. Or some people look at me like, oh, wow, she's quite arrogant, isn't she? Again, they don't really understand what it is. And
Right.
but me at the time, I didn't know what it was. So it was actually my mom who started explaining through other friends and psychologists. Like she had been reading books, and she said, "I think she is gifted." But the shock came when she told me, "I think you're gifted too." In hindsight, and I was like shocked to the bone, because I thought, like, me. I mean, I don't think I'm stupid, but I never thought that I was that smart. Like, yeah, I'm smart, but I'm no, I've never been at the top of my class. I've been towards the top, but never at the top. And I always felt that I was struggling a little bit more than others to pay attention and to learn things. And then that's when the ADHD. I started thinking my family didn't believe me when I told them I think I may have ADHD. It's just in women it presents very differently, so it was all like inside me. And this is like the twice exceptionality that maybe you can talk about as well, is no one realizes that I have this high potential because I have ADHD. No one realizes that I have ADHD because I have this high potential. So it all kind of masks with each other. But I wonder, if you could maybe explain our listeners what giftedness is and what is not.
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So giftedness is, well, I'll start with what it's not. It's not academic achievement. It's not being really good at school, right? Just like what you just explained, that people that are gifted sometimes will be excellent students and sometimes will be not at all thriving in school. So giftedness, though, is some sort of advanced like cognitive or intellectual kind of capacity. And I personally don't really like to adhere to the idea of giftedness being just high IQ, because IQ tests are very flawed. And it's not that they, someone takes an IQ test and it says that they are gifted, which is, having an IQ that's over a certain number. And I don't even like to talk about the numbers just because I don't think it's useful, but that's what an IQ test would do. It would say, if you're over a certain number, then you are gifted. So if somebody gets identified as gifted using an IQ test, it's not that they're could possibly not be gifted if they're identified. It's that the test will miss a lot of people who are also gifted, especially people who are neurodivergent in other ways as well, or disabled in some other way, or if they, they're less likely to get tested at all, especially in a school setting, if they're, say, like Black or Latino. So I don't really like to adhere to the idea of IQ as being the only way to identify giftedness. I personally like to talk about giftedness as being defined by certain needs. So what those needs are, it will vary from person to person in the specifics, but it's something having to do with like a need for intellectual stimulation and complexity, which there are people who need intellectual stimulation that aren't gifted, but they usually wouldn't have that same level of complexity to it. And so complexity being, what complex means is like where you have multiple things, like, how do I describe that? Like multiple threads that are weaved together to create an understanding. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that well. Again, it's a complex subject.
Yeah. Okay. But the bigger picture, like putting things together, pieces together in a puzzle.
Yeah, exactly. So that is one of the gifted needs that I find, is like a need for intellectual stimulation and complexity. Also a need to understand the why of things in the learning process. So as opposed to just memorizing a formula in math or something, that a gifted person would need to understand why it is why you're using that formula. There's also a need to ask more questions than peers. And that can be, all these things I'm naming, these can be in childhood or they can be in adulthood as well. So in a job environment, a gifted person is more likely to be asking a lot of questions, as opposed to someone that is like just academically advanced, or a really good employee, say. They're more likely to have someone ask a question and they'll answer the question. They'll just kind of regurgitate the information. They're good at memorizing. Whereas a gifted person might not know the answer, but they're going to instead ask a whole bunch of questions about the question. So again, it's this complexity that comes in. Another part of it is like needing to have an increase in complexity as soon as you've understood a basic concept of something, as opposed to like learning something and needing to learn it in this linear fashion where it's just step by step with many repetitions of each step as you go. That instead a gifted person will often, like, once they get the basics, they're like, okay, we need to skip ahead a whole bunch to something that's more complex. Like, rather than just learning this information, I need to take what I've learned and manipulate it and play with it in all these various ways. So another aspect of that is like needing to focus, or a tendency to focus on like big picture instead of just the details. And that includes kind of a tendency towards like meta thinking. So like thinking about thinking. And then another aspect of giftedness that I see really often is like a need for support for their existential intensity, however that manifests. So a lot of gifted people will end up having like existential depression or existential anxiety and just be thinking about or talking about existential issues that oftentimes they won't get mirroring of that. And so that is a need that they have, though, is to be able to explore things related to their kind of existential experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of the sad things is that actually many people are misdiagnosed with autism or ADHD when there is giftedness there. So that's especially here in the UK, giftedness is not a thing at all. Um, so I struggle a lot, especially with my child. I What I've noticed, it was really cool reading that diagram, because I feel like for the first time in my life, with the assessments and the diagram, that looking back, I started making sense of everything in my life. It's like that intensity is definitely there, and I think from what I was reading is something common between ADHD and giftedness and autism. And I certainly had this existential crisis, like, and the fact that it's what you say. I need to understand how everything links together, and there is this kind of the way we think and feel is like these ramifications. You don't think linearly, but it kind of spreads like this, and there is like ramifications to every single thing. It's quite overwhelming. And I used to feel like, I understand now why, but I felt a bit guilty, especially at work, because I was like really into something like when it was new. And that's probably as well the ADHD and the novelty craving, and but also the giftedness. But then once it's done and that kind of phase is gone, I feel like really uninspired, really bored. I feel bored like listening sometimes to people, because I feel like I've already gotten to the conclusion, and they will not get there like in a long time, if they do at all. And I used to wonder, like, am I crazy or something? And then it started making sense, because as you say, like, the assessment for giftedness for me had several parts, because otherwise it can be disguised with, say, dyslexia, ADHD, or something else. Um, so there was like there's the verbal, the communication skills. There was the logic, thinking. There was creativity as well, um, sensory as well. Um, Working memory. There seems to be another one that I've forgotten about, but it was interesting how the psychologists explained that before it used to be all combined into one, and that was the IQ that you got, but they
Mm.
stopped doing that because, for example, for me with ADHD, my working memory is low, therefore it could hide my giftedness from the other sections. So yeah, that's actually quite interesting to hear. And I wonder, could you maybe specify a little bit for children, like how would you, I guess, suspect that your child could be gifted?
Yeah. Yeah. It again, it varies so much from child to child. And of course, it depends on what else might be happening for them in their experience. So, again, like if someone is also autistic, it might look different than if they were just gifted, um, or if they have any other kind of, well, like, well, okay, I'll start over. Basically, one way would be through language. Like, that's one of the ways that gifted kids get identified, is if they have like early language skills or advanced language skills. So, not necessarily even early, but just once they start speaking, they would be advanced in some way. But it could also be in a child who is non-speaking. Again, if somebody was, say, autistic, also they might be non-speaking, and so the giftedness would not be quite as apparent. And so that can be more difficult. It takes, honestly, kind of a lot of observation from a parent to notice those little differences of how they might be perceiving things in a way that is different from their peers. Um, Sometimes it can be with what they are taking in, like with language skills, we have expressive language, which is the speaking, and then we have the receptive language, which is like what we understand. And so if a child is delayed in their expressive language, they might, though, be advanced in their receptive language, but it's going to be harder to recognize that. Like with, some kids, it might not be until they get go to see a speech therapist, that they do some testing and then realize that they have advanced receptive language skills, for example. So again, it can really depend. I was going to say something else about the thought's gone. I'm not sure. You mentioned working memory. That's one of the things that I struggle with, especially as I'm getting older, is my working memory with ADHD, that like I will be speaking and I have an intention to say something and then it's just gone. What's interesting though, I mean, this is just kind of a tangent, but like, I think that has to do with giftedness also sometimes, because of that, the complexity in the thoughts, that sometimes my thoughts will be going in multiple directions, which can also be part of ADHD. But the thoughts are going in multiple directions. And so trying to hold on to those thoughts so that I can speak about one part of it, and then the other part like floats away as I'm speaking about this part. That's one of the things that can be a struggle. Something I wanted to say though, you mentioned before that people will get misdiagnosed as autistic or having ADHD when they're actually gifted. And yes, that can happen. And maybe it happens more where you are. But I have honestly seen more of the opposite, where someone gets identified as gifted, and it's not that it's a wrong identification, but that the autism and ADHD gets missed. That seems to happen a lot, especially here in the US. It's really common, and that's where unfortunately, there are a lot of people who were identified as gifted and then later figured out that they're autistic or have ADHD or both. And so then they think that that means they're not actually gifted, or they think that giftedness is not a real idea. Like they will think, oh, well, giftedness is just something that like is a label that they'll give kids because they don't want to identify them, or they don't want to diagnose them as autistic, but it's not a real thing. And that is really harmful, because that's not true, obviously. But I think what happens is they have their own experience, and then they meet a couple other people that have had a similar experience that confirms this idea, and then they think, okay, that's it. That's what happened. I'm not actually gifted. But in reality, there are people who are just gifted also. It's not that everyone who is gifted is also autistic or an ADHDer. But that is one of the issues that we're having right now, I think, is that people will say, oh, well, that you're not really gifted, you're just autistic. But that can be a very harmful thing to talk about. And so I think it's important to recognize that we need to get the whole picture, like you and I were able to do, like to know that we are not just one of these things or two of these things even, but that there's multiple things going on, and that all of those things are important in understanding our needs, right? Because like I was saying, giftedness, I define it by needs, but I also like to define autism and ADHD by needs as opposed to like behaviors or something.
And some of the things that I noticed as well with giftedness, and as I haven't been investigated. I'm not going to be taking that credit. That's my mom. So my mom's investigated and she passed it on to me. But basically, is perfectionism one of them, which I found like both with my child and me sometimes and this is why some gifted people don't succeed academically or even at work, because unless you feel like you're going to do it perfectly, then you don't even want to attempt. You would you just won't do it. And then there is the fact that if you're gifted, that doesn't mean that you're good at everything. You're really good at the things that you really like, and everything else is just it's boring, and maybe not so as engaging. And what was the other thing? It was actually social. Your social skills are also can hint towards giftedness. The asynchronous, how do you call it? Asynchronous
development.
Development, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, when someone has the capacity to figure out things that you're not equipped to handle as a child, it can make it really hard socially. Like yes, it's just like as well. I think like the kind of interest that you have may not be similar to the ones that other children have, because they're not quite there yet. But also as an adult, what I notice is there is a need for depth, for in connections, with other people. There is a need for that kind of more complexity, like being able to talk about things that are not just usual stuff, like superficial stuff. You want complexity, and that again is not something that you get from everyone. So it can have an impact on your social skills.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There's so much in what you just said. All of that. There's so many directions we could go. We could talk about any of those things for probably an hour each or more. But yeah, I'll just kind of bounce off some of the things that you said. I mean, the perfectionism, yeah, for sure, that can be really common. And I think part of that is like with this sort of increased awareness, there can be an awareness of like what the possibilities are. So like we can imagine like say we're trying to work on a project, like especially as a child, they can imagine what it could be like, and so then they try to put that into action, and it doesn't look the way that they imagined it, and then they're frustrated. But a big part of it also is because with giftedness, there's certain things will be very, very easy. Um, Obviously, not everything will, because of what you said. Asynchronous development is a big part of it's part of giftedness. It's also part of autism and ADHD, just in different ways. But with asynchronous development, it's where we'll have certain areas where we will be sort of advanced or kind of ahead of our peers, and then certain areas that we will be kind of behind our peers. And so then within the person, that leads to there being these big like this the spikiness in our profile, they would say. So what happens though is the areas where things come a little bit easier for us, we then start to think everything should be like that for us. So other people think that about us, which can be harmful, but we also will start to think that. And we also we won't have the same tolerance for the struggle of the learning process. So like, I mean, I could give an example for myself. When I was a child, reading came very easy to me. Not necessarily, I mean, I didn't have a speech delay, but like trying to speak was not easy because of just, being autistic, and like there was a lot of difficulty in speaking in certain settings. But the actual reading and doing the anything related to language arts in school was pretty easy for me. But then math was not. It didn't come that easily. And it wasn't to the level of having like a learning disability, but it just didn't come as easily. And so I thought, oh, I'm just not good at this. I just can't do it. And then I ended up, even though I was in a gifted program, I ended up having a tutor for math. And all they did was sort of take me through like, okay, well, this is what you need to learn. And you actually have to like study it. You actually have to memorize your times tables, instead of what had happened for me with language arts, where it just sort of came to me. I didn't have to do that step-by-step process, but with math, I did need the step-by-step process. So I was able to learn what I needed for math, at least, the basics. I never went very advanced with math, but, all that I needed for all of the degrees that I got. But so that experience of some things being easy, some things being hard, can make us then think, oh, well, everything is supposed to be like perfectly easy the first time we do it. We're supposed to be perfect at it the first time we do it. And if not, then we're just not supposed to do that thing. So that's part of the perfectionism, I think, also. And then what you were saying about just social skills, like yes, that can be like just social interactions, social connection. There can be difficulties for someone who is gifted, and then it will be more for someone who is gifted and autistic, or gifted and an ADHD, or all three. but sometimes they sort of like cancel each other out in a way to make it so that the social interactions are actually slightly easier than they would be for someone who was, say, just autistic. Because with giftedness, we might have the ability to perceive certain things that that someone else might not perceive. With ADHD, because of the, like you were naming, like needing novelty and excitement, that can lead to us putting ourselves in social situations more than we would have than we might have otherwise. So again, it's like this interplay between all of these things, and it can look different for each person, and that can be based on so many factors, including their identity. So it could be their gender, it could be their race, it could be their ethnicity, it could be the culture that they're in, it could be their just their environment in general. So if they're, if a family includes many people who are similar types of neurodivergence, then that child's experience is going to be really different than if they are sort of the one person in their family who ended up, which is pretty unlikely because all of this is somewhat genetic, right? But it does happen sometimes where someone will be, especially with giftedness, where like someone will be gifted and they won't necessarily have family members who are gifted. And so that can lead to a different experience of connection, right? Like that depth of connection that's needed that you named. If you have family members who need that also, you're more likely to get that at a young age, versus if you don't, then you're less likely to get that. And so then that can be a very, very different experience.
So we touched upon this, but I just want to bring it up again about twice exceptionality and three exceptionality, just because for the listeners, it's probably not what they think. Just listening at the name, it comes across as you're like twice amazing or three times
Right.
amazing to the rest of the people. Like just giftedness, they might think it is about your intelligence level, which we've already said is so much more than that. So just for twice exceptionality and three exceptionality, this may be even more than that, but can you just briefly explain what that actually means?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that is important to understand. So twice exceptional would be someone who is gifted and disabled in some way. Some people use a less inclusive definition that is gifted plus like another form of neurodivergence specifically. So like autism or ADHD or dyslexia. But I personally like the definition that is gifted plus any disability, because physical disabilities, like the experience of having a physical disability and being gifted, is really important to recognize and identify, because it's obviously it's a different way that it'd be a slightly different experience, but there are some commonalities in terms of like what happens, which is part of it is that being gifted and disabled, there is a way that one can mask the other. Or they can both mask the other in some ways. So that's twice exceptional. So that's basically like you have, and like to answer what you were saying about this idea that exceptional means like good or twice good, basically like twice exceptionally good. Exceptional, that word exceptional can mean like better, but it can also just mean a difference, like the exception to the rule. So an exception. So in this situation, that's what it's referring to, is being different in two ways, but specifically giftedness plus something else like disability. So some other kind of disability. I do think that this term, it is misleading, because it almost seems like that could be a way to describe someone who's just multiply neurodivergent or disabled in two ways even. But it happens to be that this is the term that was created by the gifted community at some point, and so that's the way it is used now. And then there's also multi-exceptional, which is to be, gifted plus multiple disabilities. So you and I would fit in that category, because there's giftedness and autism and ADHD. And then thrice exceptional which is written as 3E. Twice exceptional is often written as 2E, thrice exceptional is 3E. So thrice exceptional would be to be gifted plus disabled plus some kind of cultural exceptionality. So that could be race, it could be ethnicity, it could be being LGBTQ. So any kind of other way that the person is within a like marginalized community within the environment that they're in.
See, I didn't know that. I thought it referred to having more than one disability. That's
Right,
quite
which would
interesting.
actually be multi-exceptional, yeah, or ME
Yeah.
is how it's sometimes written.
I have to admit, I am not a huge fan of the term disability for neurodivergence because I have to say, like, when I was diagnosed with ADHD or assessed for it, I was a bit frustrated because I felt like everything that ADHD brought me was negative. It's a disability, isn't it? So basically, you have some problems with focus. I had some problems with maybe social skills, but not that I'm not friendly or something like that. I have like lots of friends, but it's the fact that I didn't really get um, the the connection, the depth of the connection that I was looking for. It's all the masking, it's all the being forgetful, maybe. So for a while, I thought everything was negative about it, and I wish, like, if I didn't have ADHD, but I was only gifted, how much better would I be? I mean, what kind of person would I be? And then I realized that it's actually not true. I mean, ADHD has lots of good things. I mean, I have my hyper focus, so it's not that I can't focus; it's just can't focus like other people. And when I focus, I get done a lot more than most people would do in longer periods of time. I need less time, and there's the um, being able to jump from one subject to another really quickly, being able to keep my calm when things are crazy and there is like a big crisis in the room and everyone is just really stressed, and you're just really calm because you can deal with adrenaline really well. um so yes, I guess, it's I don't know what your thoughts are about this, but I just don't feel disabled. I just feel like the society is disabled because they don't account for my type of greatness.
Right. So I think what's important to, there's a few things there. I'm glad you're bringing this up. And I do have some things to say. So, one, I think it's important to recognize that disabled is different from disordered. So even though technically autism and ADHD are, if the entire name is, autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, I sort of ignore that D, the disorder part of it. I don't think of it as a disorder because a disorder implies that it is like a sickness, like something to be cured. And I don't think of it in that way. But that is different from disabled. So, and a way to understand that is to know that there are different models of disability. And what most people are aware of, and what you just kind of spoke from, is from the mindset of the medical model of disability, which is similar to disorder, which is this idea that if someone is disabled, that we need to try and fix the person to make them less disabled. So change the person in some way. Versus there are other models of disability that have been around for many years. For example, the social model of disability, which is the idea of what you just said, that it's actually more about changing society to accommodate the person. So rather than trying to get someone who's not able to walk to learn to walk, which of course, like, yes, if that's possible, then do it. But if not, then you put in ramps so that they can get into the places that they need to get to. So you make the accommodation in society instead of changing the person in some way. So that's the social model of disability. So the idea is that the person is disabled by society. So disabled becomes a verb instead of a noun in that situation. So they are disabled. So not everybody likes that model though. And so there are some other models that have arisen after that, sort of like, I'm not going to remember the names of all of them right now. One of them I know is like the holistic model of disability, I think. And that's sort of more like kind of combining both. It's the idea that for some people, they really are disabled by something that's happening within them, and that no accommodation can make them be fully able, but that some people are disabled by society, and that there can be a combination. And the key, though, is that it's the person gets to have the autonomy to decide for themselves which it is. So we never define for another person. Like, we would never say, that you are disabled, and define what way they are disabled, specifically, if it's by society or if it's just inherent within themselves, but instead to let people decide that for themselves. And I personally like that model because that fits more for my experience, that there are many aspects of my experience that I am able to accommodate. And so I do not feel disabled. Like, I'm self-employed. I get to have my own little office where I get to have whatever chair, whatever desk, whatever lighting, whatever stims and fidgets around that I want. I can make my own schedule. So I don't feel disabled in terms of my work. But if I tried to go work in a corporate job somewhere, which I have in the past, I did feel like I was definitely not able to do it. Like, it just did not work for me. And especially things, having to do with ADHD, where it is like, there are definitely strengths, and there are ways that no matter how many accommodations there are, that it will still be a challenge in certain areas. So I think a combination can be useful. I also, though, one of the things with the Venn diagram that I did is I purposely used, or I tried to use, neutral language. So I didn't use pathologizing language, so like deficit-based language. I didn't say like social deficits in communication, for example. Like, I didn't use the DSM languaging for, say, autism. But I also didn't do like the superpower languaging. I didn't shift all the way to the other extreme of talking about the superpowers of any of these kinds of neurodivergence. And I did that. I tried to do it with all three, with autism, ADHD, and giftedness, to use neutral language, like neutral or slightly affirming, but not these extremes on either end. And part of like why I did that was because there's so few resources out there that talk about autism, ADHD, and giftedness, but use the same languaging. Like, many resources will talk about giftedness as this strength, kind of like you said, where people said like, oh, congratulations on being gifted. So they will talk about giftedness as this strength and this like amazing thing. And then they'll talk about autism and ADHD as these like disorders, and they'll pathologize them. And then that makes it really difficult for anyone who's trying to figure out where they fit or where their child fits, if the languaging is like that. Because of course we want to see hopefully we want to see ourselves and our children in an affirming way. And that's where some people will get identified as gifted and not as the other kinds of neurodivergence, because of a parent or a teacher wanting to be affirming and seeing the strength in their child, and not seeing them as disabled or as as disordered. But that's because of the way the languaging is. So if we do it in this neutral way, I think it opens up the option for people, and the possibility for people to be able to see their experience or their child's experience in it in a more objective way, instead of kind of this like emotional reaction to the languaging.
The language definitely impacted me a lot. Or the way that we talk about autism and ADHD, even giftedness, because it's too positive, it doesn't really cover the reality of it. So I thought for a while, it's like, why is this happening to me? Why do I have to have ADHD? This is awful. I wish I was just gifted. It just doesn't cover the reality of what either thing is. So the next thing I want to talk about is intersectionality. I don't know if you are familiar with that term. Yes. So just for if someone is listening and they are not very sure, so intersectionality is a framework that looks into all the different identities that a person will have, and how each of them together can either grant you privilege or cause discrimination or barriers. So, for example, it would be like your gender, neurotype, your mental health, or whether you're able or disabled, your religion, race, all that stuff. So something that I started studying when I realized I was neurodivergent was, it's that point in your life where you start to, or you try to make sense of everything that's happened before. And I realized that my gender, together with my neurodivergence, had put me at higher risk on certain things than it did to other people. So, for example, eating disorders. I've been struggling with them for as long as I can remember, and I started looking. As a woman, I will be in a higher risk of having an eating disorder just because of the beauty standards and how we are supposed to look, especially after as you get older and you have children, and then your body just doesn't look like they tell you it should look. But I then realized that having ADHD or being neurodivergent also put me at higher risk, even higher risk than just a neurotypical woman. And I remember, like, for example, it was the trying to get into hyperfocus is really stressful. So I remember I didn't know I had ADHD, but I was studying for university or even for a secondary school, and I'll sit down and then I'll just bounce up and go to the kitchen, to the fridge. And, it's that anxiety that you get and you feel like you're trying to look for coping mechanisms. But because you don't know why this is happening, then you're not able to find healthy coping mechanisms. And usually it's the unhealthy ones that you get stuck with. So the visits to the fridge and my family not understanding why I was snacking so much. And it just made me feel awful because I couldn't stop it. And as I got older, the stress, that's how your body learns how to cope with it, because the way you think, the way you feel, it's just doesn't fit in this society. So you start, I guess, experiencing more mental health challenges. That's another thing, that you're more higher risk. Domestic abuse as well, because not only being a woman, but being neurodivergent means that you probably haven't felt like you fitted anywhere. And if there's this one really charming person that makes you feel like, that you suddenly fit in, then there is even higher risk, because there's a lot of disinformation as well in the topic. So yeah, I don't know if you've ever, it wasn't really a question, but it was more of a discussion point. I don't know if you've ever thought about this or something that came across for you.
Yeah, first I just want to say everything you just said was like, you said that so well. It was I love everything that you just explored and described, because I think those are such important points to recognize, like how how our identities can end up leading to certain other issues that will be more likely to come up, like eating disorders, like you said. And yeah, I love the way you described that with the examples. So yeah, that was great. And yes, I've definitely thought about this and talked about this before. And there's, again, like you said, there's so many different possible identities that can intersect in these different ways. One thing, just the other day, I was looking at research that was showing that in gifted, I don't remember if it was children or adolescents. I think it might have been adolescents, that gifted girls are more likely to have anxiety disorders than non-gifted girls, like non-gifted peers. But the same is not true for boys. So gifted boys, there isn't this increase in anxiety, which is really interesting. Like, why that is, I don't know specifically, but, like you're naming, like when you have anxiety, then you're going to try and figure out ways to cope. And food can sometimes be one way to cope, either restricting or binging or various other things. So that's just one aspect that I think with gender can be interesting, that how we can end up having these other mental health disorders that are more likely to occur based on this intersectionality. And then also, with this subject, I think it's always important to just talk about, I mean, I named it earlier, I guess, that identification, like identification of giftedness, that a Black or a Latino child is less likely to get referred to get for testing to get identified as gifted in childhood or adolescence. So that's just a fact that that's less likely to happen. And that's how people get identified as gifted, is usually a teacher referring them. Or sometimes it might be a parent. Like for me, I'm pretty sure it was actually that one of my parents asked if I could get tested for giftedness. So I was tested a year after my peers because everyone else was not, everyone else had already gone through it, anyone who was going to. And then my parent was like, hey, I think that this should happen. And then it turned out that I was gifted. And I was almost like the year before that, the teacher wanted to hold me back a year. Because of my social differences and physical, because I was very small. I was also young for my grade, and I was small, and ADHD, I'd be sitting up on my knees on my desk, like moving around, and so they said that was evidence that I needed to be held back a year. And instead, a year later, I was not held back, but I was tested for giftedness and then moved into a gifted program. And I have often wondered how different that would have been if I had been, a boy. How different would the situation have been? Or if I'd been a person of color, because there are various factors that could have played into, like, if my parent had said, hey, I think you should test her for giftedness, would they have taken them as seriously? Or the other thing is that, parents who are people of color are less likely to know about gifted programs. And so then they're less likely to even bring it up with a teacher. So that's another factor there. Another thing I want to name, because we're almost out of time, I'm realizing, is a couple of resources that I think are really useful. It's another podcast, actually. The podcast I Must Be Buggin' with Sheldon Gay is really, I don't know if you're familiar with Sheldon, but he's Black and gifted, and he was identified as gifted also as an adult, like kind of similar in age, actually, I think, to what you said, like late 30s, I think, or maybe even into early 40s. And so his podcast specifically talks about the experience of giftedness and other kinds of neurodivergence related to being Black. So I just want to name that because he's had some really excellent episodes that go into this in a lot of depth. And so that would be another resource to explore that more.
Never heard about him, so I'll look him up. Thank you.
Yeah.
One last question, and it's to do with something that you mentioned before about the workplace. You mentioned that you've been working for yourself for a while, and that's worked fantastically well. While in the corporate world, you did feel disabled, and I guess I have a very similar experience, I suppose. Yes, I mean, in the workplace, I feel like there is a way of being, and as much as companies do talk about this inclusion and how they understand how great it is, I actually see a lot of neurodivergent people being pulled back in the way that the way they communicate, miscommunication, misconduct, and the way they come across. I mean, they are a bit more socially awkward, so they don't connect in the same way with other people. So they are less likely to be put forward for promotion. So it becomes like really difficult, especially when we talk about intersectionality. You become a woman, and not become a woman, you're a woman. And, as you age, you enter perimenopause together with the neurodivergence. It just kind of changes things, your coping mechanisms from before, especially like you become a mother as well, or a parent, and suddenly the coping mechanisms that you had before don't really work anymore. A lot of women as well don't know that they are neurodivergent, just because the way the studies were done, we're looking more at how men show the traits rather than women. So all of these factors make it really difficult not to feel disabled in the corporate world. And what I found is I went from feeling disabled to just the way the situation is going. I'm starting my own business, and I feel like if only I had been given this freedom to do things the way that I feel most natural, it feels most natural to me, I could have been like amazing, like the money and the potential that employers are losing for not really understanding neurodivergence. And I actually, there is a place here in Scotland that helps you build a business. So you get lots of you get people go in and they give you courses and things like that. So a lot of the people, like when we were introducing ourselves, we were neurodivergent. And then you start realizing that, it's just really hard to fit into a corporate environment. So the question, that was the background, a very long one. The question was, um, do you have any advice for whether it's employees who are neurodivergent or for employers who want to be inclusive of neurodivergent people? What can they do?
Oh gosh, that's there's so much there. Yeah, I feel like it's hard for me to say like a summary with not having a ton of time. But for the employees, I think just to recognize that if you are not doing well in a work environment, to look at whether like rather than looking at you needing to change, to figure out how can your environment change, either the environment like being staying where you are but shifting, making changes within that environment, or finding a completely different environment that's a better fit for you. And a big part of that is understanding your needs, right? And like personally, when I was in my early 20s and working in a corporate environment, I had no idea. I didn't know anything about my needs, really. I thought I did, but I didn't. Um, and so to do some exploration of understanding yourself, I think is one of the key things, like to really look into like, who am I? What do I care about? What are my values? What are my sensory needs? What are my movement needs, which is also sensory, but more specific? What are my intellectual needs? Just to learn all of those things about yourself in order to try to make some changes. And it might involve some experimentation. I mean, that's what it was for me. It was many years of working in a lot of different environments before figuring out what works best for me. For employers, gosh, again, there's a lot there, but I think getting feedback from employees and actually listening to that feedback, and to try to shift things, if you can, away from like I don't know, some corporate environments to me felt like sort of an extension of high school, sort of like it was like there were like cliques, and there was like you had to be kind of cool enough and wearing the right clothes to be considered cool, and to be able to fit in that environment. And it was less about what you were actually doing, like how productive you were and what your skills were. And it was a lot of it became about how you could socialize and what clothing you were wearing and things like that. And so obviously not all corporate environments are like that. Things have probably changed even in the years since I was in that job. But I think the more that we do that, the better. The more that we shift towards like, less image oriented and more towards what are we actually doing? Like what is the actual, how are we working together and what are we creating, as opposed to having an image of professional, whatever that means.
Yeah, I mean, that's some really good advice. Thank you so much. And I think it's for sure, like for any specific employee, understanding who they are and what they need is the key thing. And we don't always know. So don't expect the employer to know. Unfortunately, they are still learning. And if they don't feel like the same pressure as you, because this is happening to you, not to them, so you have to prioritize yourself and get to know yourself before you expect someone else to get to know you, unfortunately. But that's just the way I find it works.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been fantastic to be able to talk to someone who understands so much, a lot of my experiences in life, and who I am as a person, and how we share those things. So it was an absolute pleasure to meet you. And
Thank you. I just want to say it was a pleasure to meet you too. And I love all of the points that you've brought up. And this was so enjoyable for me also to get to hear your experiences and the perspectives that you bring. So thank you very much.
that's not a problem at all. And yeah, thank you for the listeners for tuning in, and I hope to see you all in the next episode.
Thank you for tuning into the Intersecting Voices podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to leave us a review on Spotify or YouTube. Your feedback helps us grow and bring you even better content. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. See you next time.